Hi, and welcome back to Reddit Whispers. My life was a story told in the grain of wood. I could look at a piece of raw timber and see its history, its potential, its soul. I could feel the memory of the forest in the patterns of the rings, the slow, patient story of sun and hardship. My name is Eamon, and for 20 years, my hands have been my voice. I am a custom woodworker, a furniture maker. My company, a small two-man workshop I had built from the ground up, was called Oak Heart Artisans. It was not just a business, it was an extension of my own heart. I didn't just build furniture, I built legacies, heirlooms, the solid, tangible objects around which families would build their own stories. I believed in things that were built to last. I believed this about the cherry wood dining tables I crafted, and I believed it about my marriage. My wife, Isla, was my partner in every sense of the word. If I was the quiet, sawdust-covered heart of the workshop, she was its brilliant, public-facing brain. She handled the clients, the finances, the marketing. She had a gift for translating my quiet, artistic passion into a language that the world of interior designers and wealthy clients could understand. She was the one who took the simple, honest work of my hands and turned it into a successful, respected, and profitable business. We were a perfect symbiotic system. I would spend my days in the controlled, fragrant chaos of the workshop, listening to the music of my tools. And she would move through the world of commerce and contracts, a graceful, intelligent, and utterly trustworthy ambassador for our shared dream. Our life was the business, and the business was our life. We lived modestly, pouring every cent of profit back into the company, into better tools, into rarer woods, into the slow, steady expansion of our reputation. I trusted her with everything. The keys to the workshop, the passwords to our bank accounts, the quiet, unspoken architecture of my own simple soul. I saw no distinction between what was mine, what was hers, and what belonged to the business. It was all one and the same. It was us. The crisis, when it came, was not a sudden, violent storm, but a slow, creeping rot. It began with a change in the market, a shift in taste away from the timeless, handcrafted quality I specialized in towards the cheap, disposable, and mass-produced. And then came the body blow. Our largest client, a boutique hotel chain for whom we were building over 100 custom pieces, declared bankruptcy overnight, leaving us with a warehouse full of finished furniture and a debt that was a six-figure black hole in our accounts. I have spent my life working with forces I can control. I can predict how a piece of maple will bend. I can anticipate the way a joint will hold under pressure. But the forces of the market are a different kind of physics, a chaotic, unpredictable, and utterly merciless element. For 6 months, we fought to survive. We took on smaller, less profitable jobs. We laid off our one employee. I worked 18-hour days, my body aching, my mind a frantic, desperate calculator of our dwindling resources. Isla was my rock. She was the one who negotiated with the banks, who held off the suppliers, who maintained a front of calm, professional competence while our world was silently, inexorably crumbling around us. She was a warrior, and I had never loved her more. The plan, the one that would ultimately be my salvation and my ruin, was hers. She presented it to me one night, in the quiet, sterile environment of our kitchen, the only room in the house that didn't smell of sawdust and despair. She had been meeting with lawyers, with financial advisors. She had been searching for a lifeline, and she had found one. It was a strategy of radical and terrifying financial surgery. "It's called a controlled burn, Eamon," she had said, her voice a low, calm, and incredibly reassuring sound in the chaos of my own fear. "The business, Oak Heart Artisans, is an asset, but right now it's also a liability, tied to your name, to your personal credit. As long as you are the owner, everything we have, the house, our savings, is exposed to the business's creditors. They can take everything." I knew she was right. "So what do we do?" I asked, my own voice a hollow, defeated thing. "We separate you from the business," she said, her eyes clear and focused. "Temporarily. You, Eamon Albright, will declare personal bankruptcy. It will be a painful, public, and humiliating process. It will destroy your personal credit for years, but it will cauterize the wound. It will satisfy your personal guarantees on the business loans. It will force the creditors to settle for pennies on the dollar. The idea was a physical blow. My name, my reputation, the simple, honest pride of a man who had always paid his debts. It was all I had. But the business, I stammered. They'll take the business, the workshop, the tools. No, she said, and this was the brilliant, beautiful, and utterly fatal part of the plan. Because just before you file, you will legally and temporarily transfer 100% of your ownership of Oakhart Artisans to me. The business will no longer be your asset. It will be mine. It will be protected from your personal bankruptcy. The creditors can't touch it. It will be a separate, legal entity. And once your bankruptcy is discharged, once the storm has passed, I will simply transfer it back to you. We will lose your personal credit, but we will save the company. We will save our life's work. It was a desperate plan. It was a legally gray plan. It was a plan that required a level of trust that was almost biblical in its totality. It required me to take everything I had ever built, the very soul of my life's work, and place it completely and unconditionally in her hands. I looked at her, at my wife, my partner, the woman who had stood by me through every struggle, every small victory. I looked into her clear, honest eyes, and I saw not a risk, but our only hope. The next 2 weeks were a blur of meetings with lawyers, of signing documents that felt like they were written in a foreign language. I was a man dismantling his own life, piece by piece, on the advice of the one person in the world he trusted completely. The final act was the signing of the transfer of ownership. We were in a sterile, anonymous lawyer's office. I had a single, heavy, and important-looking document in front of me. The pen in my hand felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "Are you sure about this, my love?" I whispered, my eyes searching hers for any flicker of doubt. She smiled, a small, sad, and incredibly brave smile. She placed her hand on mine. Her hand was warm. "We're a team, Eamon," she said. "We're in this together. This is the only way. We have to be brave." I took a deep breath, and I signed the paper. I signed away my name. I signed away my company. I signed away my entire tangible world. I had just set the fire, the controlled burn that was supposed to save the forest. And as I looked at the relief in my wife's eyes, I had no idea that I was not the forest. I was just the dead wood that was about to be cleared away. The day after I signed the document, a profound and unfamiliar calm settled over me. I had made the ultimate sacrifice. I had thrown myself on the financial grenade to save my family, my business, my future. The feeling was not one of fear, but of a strange, clean, and almost noble sense of purpose. I had done the hard, necessary, and right thing. The public humiliation of the bankruptcy, the years of rebuilding my own personal credit, it was all just a part of the price, a price I was willing to pay. That morning, I went to the workshop. It felt different. It was no longer technically mine. I was an employee now, a guest in the house I had built. But it was a temporary state of affairs, a legal fiction we had created to survive. The smell of the cedar and the oak was the same. The tools still fit my hands perfectly. The work was still there, a backlog of smaller projects that, I believed, keep us afloat until the storm passed. I was sanding a piece of beautiful reclaimed walnut, the rhythmic scraping sound of familiar and comforting meditation, when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Eamon Albright?" a man's voice asked. "Yes," I said. "This is David Chen from the Artisans Guild magazine. I'm calling about Oakhart Artisans. We heard a rumor that it's just been sold. I was hoping you could give me a comment for an article we're running." The sanding block in my hand stopped moving. The world, for a moment, seemed to go silent, except for the frantic, sudden hammering of my own heart. "Sold," I repeated, the word a dry, foreign object in my mouth. There must be a mistake. The company has not been sold. Well, that's not what Marcus Thorne is saying, the reporter replied, his voice full of a casual, professional curiosity. He just posted a press release on his company's website an hour ago, announcing the acquisition. He said he's planning to streamline the brand and move the operations to his main facility. Marcus Thorne. The name was a punch to the gut. He was my biggest competitor. A man who ran a large, soulless, factory-like operation that churned out cheap, imitation versions of the kind of work I did. He was a vulture, a man who represented everything I despised about the modern furniture industry. He was not a craftsman. He was a manufacturer of mediocrity. The idea of him owning my company, my name, my legacy, was a violation so profound it made me physically ill. "There is no sale," I said, my voice a low, dangerous growl. "Thorne is lying." "Okay," the reporter said, his tone shifting from curious to cautious. "Well, if you have a different statement, I'd be happy to." I hung up the phone. My hands were shaking. It was a lie. It had to be a lie. A dirty corporate tactic from Thorne, a way to create chaos, to damage my reputation. Isla would never. She would never. I called her. Her phone went straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. A cold, black tendril of dread began to snake its way around my heart. I left the workshop. I got in my truck. I drove to our house. And as I turned onto our street, I saw it. Her car was gone. I ran inside. The house was silent, empty, but it was not completely empty. On the polished, cherry wood dining table, the first piece of furniture I had ever built for us, was a single white envelope. My name was written on it in her familiar, elegant script. It was not a letter. It was a legal document, a petition for divorce. And tucked inside it was a cashier's check, made out to me for a sum of money that was so small, so insulting, that it was not a settlement. It was a final, dismissive wave of the hand. It was, I realized with a sickening, hollow certainty, my share of the sale. She had sold my life's work for a pittance, for a fraction of its true value, to the one man in the world she knew I despised. And she had left me with this pathetic, meaningless check, and a legal document that formally and brutally ended our life together. The controlled burn had not been a strategy to save the forest. It had been a strategy to clear the land, and I had been the forest. The betrayal was so total, so audacious, so complete, that my mind could not fully process it. It was like trying to look directly at the sun. I was not just a man who had lost his business. I was a man who had been erased. My name was on a bankruptcy filing. My company was in the hands of my enemy. My wife was gone. The house we lived in, which had been in her name as part of our asset protection plan, was no longer my home. I was a man with nothing. Nothing but the clothes on my back, a truck that was about to be repossessed, and a mountain of personal debt that I now had no way to pay. The phone rang again. It was my lawyer, the one who had handled the bankruptcy filing. His voice was grim. "Eamon," he said, "there's a problem. The creditors committee, they're challenging the transfer of the business. They're claiming fraudulent conveyance. They're saying you deliberately transferred the asset to your wife to defraud them." Of course they were, because that is exactly what I had done. I have committed fraud. But I had done it on the belief that I was saving my company, my life. I had done it on the basis of a lie told to me by the woman who was, I now realized, not my partner, but my saboteur. And then, the final, devastating piece of the puzzle fell into place. I remembered a conversation from a few months ago, Isla talking about running into an old friend from college, a man she had dated briefly, a man who was now a successful entrepreneur, a man named Marcus Thorne. It had not been a random encounter. It had not been a dirty corporate tactic from him. It had been a plan, a long, patient, and perfectly executed plan. She had not just left me. She had conspired with my greatest rival to destroy me. She had used my love, my trust, and my desperation as the weapons of my own destruction. She had handed him my company on a silver platter, and in return, he had given her, what? A new life? A share of the profits? The thrill of the betrayal itself? I did not know. I only knew that I was a man who was standing in the empty, silent ruins of his own life, and that the architect of that ruin was the one person in the world I had believed was my co-builder. The phone buzzed again. It was a text message from her. "I'm sorry, Eamon," it read. "It was just business." Business. The word was a final, cold, and utterly unforgivable insult. My life, my love, my work, my soul, it had all just been a business transaction. And I had just been, it was now painfully clear, liquidated. The weeks that followed the liquidation were a period of profound and terrifying dislocation. I was a ghost, haunting the periphery of a life that was no longer mine. The bankruptcy proceedings were a slow, grinding, and humiliating process. I was a man forced to stand in a courtroom and list my own failures, my own debts, my own worthlessness, all while knowing that the entire process was based on a lie I had been tricked into telling. My lawyer did what he could, but we were outmaneuvered at every turn. Isla and her new partner, Marcus Thorne, had the best corporate lawyers money could buy. My fraudulent conveyance of the business to her was the cornerstone of their case against me. They painted me as a desperate, dishonest man trying to cheat my creditors, and I had no defense. To tell the truth, that she had manipulated me, that it was all a part of a larger conspiracy, would have been to admit my own, willing complicity in the initial fraud. I was trapped in the very legal cage I had helped her to build. The result was a complete and total financial annihilation. The bankruptcy court pierced the corporate veil. What was left of my personal assets, my truck, my tools, the small savings account I had kept for emergencies, was seized and liquidated to pay the creditors. The house, which was legally hers, remained untouched. The business, which was legally his, was safe. I was left with nothing, less than nothing. I was a man in his mid-40s with a ruined credit score, a public record of bankruptcy, and a personal debt that would follow me for the rest of my life. I was, in the cold, hard language of the world, worthless. I lost the house, of course. I slept in my truck for a week until that too was taken. And then I was on the street. Not literally, not at first. I had friends, a few loyal guys from the old workshop who offered me their couches, their spare rooms. But I was a ghost in their homes too. A silent, hollowed-out man, a walking testament to a failure so complete they could not begin to understand it. The shame was a physical, constant presence, a heavy, leaden cloak that I could not take off. The hardest part was the loss of the work. My hands, which had known the language of wood for 20 years, were now idle. My identity as a craftsman, the one true thing I had ever been, had been sold for scrap. I would walk past furniture stores, and I would see the cheap, mass-produced garbage that was now the standard, and I would feel a sense of loss so profound it was like a physical ache in my chest. I had not just lost a company, I had lost a calling. For months, I drifted. I took on menial, under-the-table jobs for cash. I was a ghost in the economic underworld, a man who officially did not exist. I worked as a mover, as a day laborer, as a painter's assistant. My hands, which had once crafted heirloom furniture, were now used for brute, mindless labor. And in a strange, punishing way, I welcomed it. The physical exhaustion was a kind of anesthetic. It was the only thing that could quiet the relentless, screaming noise in my own head. The turning point, the beginning of the long, slow, and arduous climb out of the abyss, was a piece of wood. It was a discarded, broken beam of old-growth oak I had found in a dumpster behind a demolition site. It was scarred and cracked and covered in a century of grime. It was a piece of wreckage. It was me. I hauled it back to the small, damp garage I was renting as a place to sleep, and I just looked at it for a long time. And then, with a small, rusty hand plane I had bought for a few dollars at a flea market, I began to work. I did not have a plan. I did not have a design. I was just working. The simple, physical act of peeling away the layers of decay, of revealing the clean, honest, beautiful grain beneath, was a form of meditation. It was a conversation. I was not just restoring the wood, I was restoring myself. The garage became my new workshop, my monastery. I became a scavenger, a collector of the broken and the discarded. I would find old, shattered furniture on the curb on trash day. I would find beautiful, weathered pieces of driftwood on the banks of the river. I was not building new things. I was finding the beauty in the broken. I was a restorer of lost causes. I worked without a purpose, without a client, without a thought of money. I worked because it was the only thing that made me feel real. It was the only thing that proved I still existed. The first person to see the work was my landlord, an old, grizzled, retired carpenter named Sal. He came to collect the rent one afternoon, and he saw the piece I had been working on, a small, elegant table I had crafted from the salvaged oak beam. He just stood there for a long moment, his old, expert eyes taking in the lines, the joints, the flawless hand-rubbed finish. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked, his voice a low, respectful grumble. "An old life," I said. He just nodded. The next day he came back. He didn't say a word. He just left a set of old but beautifully maintained hand tools on my workbench. A set of chisels, a dovetail saw, a block plane. It was not a gift of charity. It was a gesture of professional respect, a recognition from one craftsman to another. And it was the first real act of human kindness I have experienced in a year. It was a crack of light in my long, dark, solitary winter. I began to build again, not a business, but a life. A small, quiet, and deeply honest life. I sold the pieces I made for small amounts of cash at a local flea market. I did not put my name on them. The work was anonymous. The joy was not in the selling, but in the making, in the slow, patient, and deeply satisfying process of bringing something beautiful out of the wreckage. I did not know what had become of Isla and Marcus Thorne. I did not allow myself to look. Their world was a foreign country, and my passport had been revoked. I had my own, small, hand-built world now, a world of salvaged wood and borrowed tools, and the quiet, steady rhythm of my own healing heart. One day, about 2 years after the collapse, Sal came to my small workshop. He was holding a glossy, high-end design magazine. He opened it to a page that had been bookmarked. "Thought you might want to see this," he said, his face unreadable. It was a feature article, a glowing, multi-page spread on a new, visionary design company that was revolutionizing the industry. The company was called Thorne Designs, and the two smiling, beautiful faces in the professional photograph on the first page were Isla and Marcus. The article was a masterpiece of public relations. It described their bold, new aesthetic, their commitment to accessible luxury. It mentioned, in a single, dismissive sentence, their acquisition of the assets of a small, failed local company called Oakhart Artisans. I read the words, and I felt nothing. The hot, searing rage of the betrayal was gone. The cold, hollow ache of the loss was gone. All that was left was a kind of distant, clinical pity. They were still living in a world of surfaces, of brands, of stories. They were still selling a beautiful, and I knew, utterly hollow lie. I looked around my small, dusty workshop. I looked at the table I was building, its grain, a deep, rich, and honest story of 100 years of life. I looked at my hands, calloused and strong. And I knew with an absolute and peaceful certainty that I was the richer man. They had taken my business, they had taken my money, they had taken my name, but they had not taken the one single thing that was truly mine, the work. And the work, I now knew, was the only thing that was real. The magazine article was not an insult, it was a gift. It was the final, clarifying piece of data that I needed to complete my own internal reconstruction. Seeing them there, smiling in the glossy, artificial light of their new, stolen life, did not reopen the wound. It cauterized it. It was the final, definitive proof that the world they inhabited and the world I was building were two separate and completely incompatible universes. Theirs was a world of surfaces, of brands, of narratives. Mine was a world of substance, of grain, of truth. And I would not have traded my small, dusty, and deeply honest world for theirs, for all the money they had stolen from me. My life continued on its new, quiet, and deliberate path. My work, the pieces I created from the broken and the discarded, began to attract a small but fiercely loyal following at the flea market. People who, like me, were looking for something real in a world of disposable fictions. I never put my name on the pieces, but my work developed a signature, a quiet, understated elegance that became recognizable. I was not building a brand, I was simply building. And the quiet, word-of-mouth reputation of the ghost craftsman of the weekend market began to grow. The man who was now the center of that quiet reputation was Sal, my landlord, my benefactor, my silent, grizzled guardian angel. He had become my friend, in the way that two quiet men who respect each other's work can be friends. We would share a coffee in the mornings, talk about the weather, about the strange, beautiful, and often frustrating nature of wood. He never asked about my past. He didn't need to. He could read the story in the grain of my life, in the quiet, focused way I worked. He knew I was a man who was rebuilding from the ground up. One day, a woman came to my stall at the market. She was elegant, sharp-eyed, and she moved with an air of quiet, professional authority. She spent a long time examining a small writing desk I had made from a fallen cherry tree. "This is your work?" she asked, her voice a low, appreciative hum. "It is," I said. "There is a story here," she said, her fingers tracing the line of a dovetail joint. "A story of something old and something new, something broken and something beautiful." She was a curator for a small but very prestigious gallery of modern craft. She offered me a solo exhibition. I was hesitant. To show my work in a gallery, to put my name on it, felt like a step back into the world I had abandoned, a world of commerce, of criticism, of surfaces. But Sal, who had been watching from a distance, came over. "You're a fool if you say no, Eamon," he grumbled, using my real name for the first time. "A man's work is meant to be seen." So I agreed. The exhibition was a quiet, modest affair, but it was a critical success. The story of the ghost craftsman, the man who created beauty from the wreckage, was a compelling one. And the work, my work, spoke for itself. It was honest, it was real, and in a world that was hungry for authenticity, it resonated. The final, unexpected, and strangely perfect chapter of my story was written by the very magazine that had once been a source of my pain. The same design magazine that had featured Thorn Designs ran a small but glowing review of my exhibition. They called my work a profound meditation on resilience and the redemptive power of the handmade. They praised its quiet, unassuming, and deeply soulful honesty. And they published my name, Eamon Albright, the name I had thought was dead and buried. The week after the review was published, I received a letter. It was forwarded to me by the gallery. The handwriting on the envelope was hers, Isla. My hands did not tremble as I opened it. The power she had once held over me was gone. The letter was short. It was not an apology, it was not an explanation, it was a cry for help. Thorn Designs, it turned out, was a house of cards. Their vision was just a series of cheap imitations of other people's work. Their accessible luxury was just a brand, with no real substance behind it. The company was failing. The creditors were circling. Marcus Thorne, the great innovator, the man she had chosen over me, had, it turned out, a history of this. He was a creator of beautiful, hollow facades. And when the structure began to fail, he did what he always did. He ran. He had taken what was left of the money, and he had disappeared, leaving her with the wreckage, with the debts, with the failure. "I know I have no right to ask you for anything," she wrote, "but I am losing everything. Again. And you are the only person I have ever known who truly knows how to build something that lasts." She was not asking for money. She was not asking for forgiveness. She was asking for a blueprint, for a way out, for a lesson in the art of survival. I held the letter in my hand, and I felt a profound and final sense of peace. The anger, the hate, the pain, it was all gone. All that was left was a kind of distant, professional pity. She was a broken piece of furniture, a beautiful but poorly designed life that had finally, inevitably, collapsed under the weight of its own dishonest construction. I took a piece of my own handmade paper. I took my favorite fountain pen, and I wrote back to her. A single sentence. "The first rule of woodworking, Isla," I wrote, "is that you cannot build a solid structure on a rotten foundation." I sealed the envelope, and I sent it. It was not an act of revenge. It was not an act of forgiveness. It was just a statement of fact, a final, quiet, and deeply honest assessment, from one craftsman to another. And then I went back to my workshop. I picked up my tools, and I went back to the only work that had ever truly been my own. If this story hits you as hard as it hit me, tell me about the time someone betrayed your trust. Comment below and make sure to like and subscribe to Reddit Whispers, the place for stories you won't hear anywhere else.